Pakistan has carried out airstrikes against terrorists in Iranian territory. Islamabad says a number of terrorists have been killed during the intelligence operation named Marg Bar Sarmachar. Islamabad says that the precision military strikes were against Pakistani terrorist Sarmachar hideouts, who have found a safe haven in Iran's Sistan-o-Baluchistan province. And according to reports, Islamabad attacked the posts of two Baloch separatist groups, that's the Balochistan Liberation Front and the Balochistan Liberation Army. Relations between Pakistan and Iran hit a new low on Wednesday. This was after Iran carried out airstrikes in Balochistan, which killed 2 children, injuring 3 other people. Tehran had said that its missile and drone attacks were targeting bases of the militant group Jaish al-Adl. My name is Marg Bar Sarmachar, and for more on this, I'm being joined by Professor James A. Russell, Associate Professor in the Department of National Security Affairs at NPS, where he's teaching courses on U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East, military innovation, and national security strategies. Sir, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
To begin with, sir, what do you think has triggered this face-off between Iran and Pakistan, starting with the strikes by Iran on Pakistan's Balochistan province, which it says were targeting Jaish al-Adl?
Well, I don't think you can regard this attack by Iran. It's Iran that initiated these exchanges in isolation from Iran's previous strikes on targets in Iraq and in Syria. It's clear that Iran has made some kind of decision that it can no longer be a passive, sort of bystander to the waves of violence that are erupting around it. And we can't forget also that Iran suffered a very serious terrorist attack recently that killed many people. And so up until this point, at least, it's Iran's sort of proxies that have been waging this violence, for example, in Gaza, the Houthis in the Red Sea. And I think Iran has this is all part of the circumstance that can arise in war, in which the pressures sort of build upon the decision makers in the states to take action, to do something. So I think these pressures all converged to produce the decisions by Iraq to strike not just Pakistan, but into Iraq and Syria as well. And of course, this is not a good thing. I mean, this is just an example of escalation and with the potential for a wider war.
Now, sir, Pakistan has hit targets inside Iran. Its Marg Bar Sarmachar operation. Islamabad says that the precision military strikes were against Pakistani-origin terrorists hideouts. They found a safe haven in Iran's Sistan-o-Baluchistan province. What's your assessment of this?
Well, one thing, again, I think these circumstances have been building momentum, which is to say, by which I mean, of course, the war in Gaza, the second-order effects of the war in Gaza, the attacks against targets in Iran, again, which produces this pressure on the decision makers to act. And we should remember that these groups, these cross-border groups that are operating along Baluchistan and Iran, these groups have been around for a long time. And both Pakistan and Iran have been dealing with them. And I think in Pakistan's case, I think it's obvious that they also felt a need to respond. And that's what's important to remember about these actions, by which I mean the shooting of missiles, the launching of airstrikes. These are meant to be sending political signals to the surrounding states. They're not that significant militarily. In other words, there aren't things that are going to be blown up which are going to have a strategic impact in and of themselves. The strategic impact, it seems to me, in a circumstance like this, is the political effect, right, of the launching of the airstrikes. It's the political effect of the launching of the missiles. And that can change the dynamics of the interactions between these two states, Pakistan and Iran in this case. I would have said, for example, at the start of the Gaza war, that I didn't think there was a prospect of a wider war. But can any observer now looking at the war in Gaza think that that's not a viable possibility? So if we turn now to the Iran-Pakistan situation, it would seem obvious to me that neither side has an interest in further escalation. Except the problem is that once countries start lobbing missiles at one another and launching aircraft and bombing each other, the war takes on, or it can take on, a logic all of itself. And that's the danger here, is that the political decision makers, and in Pakistan, it's not even clear that they have a civilian government in charge at this stage of the game. Who are the decision makers, right? So the point is that the exigencies of violence, the use of violence can create pressures all of their own on the political leadership on both sides, on both Iran and Pakistan, to keep the violence going, to keep escalating, even though their interests are to not have a wider war.
Right. In fact, sir, I was just going to come to this. I wanted to understand what's your assessment of what it means for the wider region.
Well, I think this is, again, just it's another example of the second order effects of the war in Gaza, right, which has now been going on for several months. And as I said in the last segment, at the outset of that war, I did not think that there was going to be a wider regional conflagration. And I think it's clear that that is not the case now. I think it's clear that the continuation of the war creates political pressures on various of the actors to escalate. And in this particular case, Iran, for example, felt the need to escalate with these strikes into Syria, with the strikes into Iraq, with the strikes against Pakistan. Iran has its own, sort of calculus to try to sort out its own political decision making on using these kinds of weapons, on using force. And they felt compelled to act for whatever reason. And I think in Pakistan's case, it's maybe a little bit more straightforward. They see themselves as a little sort of further removed from the war in Gaza. But here we see a war thousands of miles away from Pakistan's border, creating political decision-making pressures inside the Iranian leadership that eventually then lead to missiles and airplanes being launched in the direction of Pakistan. It's just an example, as I say, of what can happen, that once people start shooting at one another, once missiles are lobbed, once airstrikes are happening, escalation can just sort of develop a momentum all its own. And therein lies, of course, the danger for the wider region.
Right, absolutely. And we're seeing that the geopolitical landscape is getting increasingly unstable and uncertain. We're seeing war on multiple fronts, and it appears to be a time of heightened anxiety and volatility. So what's your take on this? How do you see the situation unfolding going forward?
Well, as I think we are in this dangerous period of uncertainty, by which I mean, again, I would have said several months ago, oh, the prospects of escalation don't seem great. But now we have the United States today launched another series of missile strikes against the Houthis in the Red Sea. The Iranians launching strikes on Pakistan, Pakistan responding. In other words, the potential for this more widespread regional free-for-all, it seems to me, is gathering momentum, dangerous momentum. And I really fear for the future. And of course, getting lost in all this is that the Palestinians continue to be slaughtered. The slaughter continues in Gaza. But the point is that the wider regional war, the embers for the wider regional war are spreading. And this is very dangerous. It's a very dangerous period for the region, and I fear for the future. And I fear, for example, of the United States getting drawn in. It already has gotten drawn in. Here we are now, effectively at war with the Houthis in Yemen, and who could have foreseen that? A couple of months ago. So I'm not sanguine about the peaceful resolution of these various disputes. As I said, it would seem to make sense to me that neither the Pakistanis nor the Iranians would have an interest in escalation. And yet, as I say, once missiles get launched, airstrikes are being launched, people are being killed, decision makers face a whole series of pressures to continue to act. And that's my fear. I mean, if we think back in history, for example, to World War I, it made no sense for any of those regional states at the time to have gone to war with one another. They were all each other's best customers. They depended upon each other for prosperity. And yet the states all tumbled down a series of decisions that produced this wider conflagration. And of course, that's the danger that we face right now, is that these situational decisions producing the impetus to act, right, ends up producing this wider regional conflagration, with the match, of course, that's lit it all being the war in Gaza. These are all the second-order effects of this ongoing war, which, again, shows no sign of letting up as the Israelis flatten Gaza and slaughter the Palestinians.
All right. All right. Well, Professor Russell, thank you so much for joining us on WION with your perspective on this.
I appreciate being asked. Thank you very much.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.